Welcome, everybody. I'm Raja Choudhury, and today I'm very happy to have my dear friend Jay Sanguinetti with me, Dr. Jay Sanguinetti, who is assistant director of the Center for Consciousness Studies at the University of Arizona, and he is a co-director of a very fascinating lab called SEMA, Sonication Enhanced Mindful Awareness. Woo! That's a mouthful. But he is doing some extremely exciting work on the effect of sound on our states of consciousness, especially mindful, how to induce mindful states. And we'll talk about that in a second. Jay has been working on the visual side of things for a long time, and his favorite catchphrase is that the brain sees more than you think. Is that what you say, Jay?
That's right.
Yes, yeah. I love that. And in our work in advanced states of tantra and the visionary states of kriya yoga and all, we also see that in the hallucinatory states we can induce, the advanced states of information we can induce. And so I'm going to have a nice relaxed conversation with Jay. Welcome, Jay, and thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Always fun to talk to you, Raja.
We've had a good time over the last year getting to know each other. I'm so grateful for it. And so tell us a bit more about the fascinating work you're doing at SEMA. What are you up to in that lab?
Sure. So SEMA Lab is co-directed by my good friend Shenzhen Yang, who's a longtime mindfulness meditation teacher and a contemplative scholar. And so Shenzhen and I started working together in about 2018 and decided to try to use non-invasive brain stimulation to help people get the effects of meditation. So we're talking about 30 years of meditation. We know that type of long-term practice can have transformational effects on people's lives, make them much happier, much deeper meaning, much more present with the people around them. So I know from talking to these long-term practitioners that you can have these types of effects. But it takes a lot of practice. And not only that, but a lot of the patients that we want to bring these practices to, like people with depression and anxiety, it's hard for them actually to sit on the meditation pillow, do the meditation, even to do mantras, things like that. Their worlds are so immediately full of suffering. It's hard to get them out of that. And so what we decided to do is try to start using different forms of technology to help people get over that hump or over that hurdle so that they can sort of lean into the practice with their life, that practice can start getting into their life and start changing their life more rapidly. So that's what we're involved with.
So you're using ultrasound technology to achieve mindful states in absolute non-meditators, is that the case?
We've done it both in people who've never meditated. We've also done it in long-term meditators. And we're trying to, in the lab, trying to quantify how the brain changes and how rapid things go. We're also very worried about safety and ethics. We want to make sure that we're helping people steer their experience towards the good stuff. Shenzhen calls it the goodies. We don't want the baddies. And many of your audience probably knows about the good and the bad that can happen with practice.
Absolutely.
And, that's okay. We know through thousands of years of contemplative practice that stuff happens. You have to be aware of it and you have to steer it towards integration. And so, we do all types of different people. But in our non-meditators, what we try to do is give them a taste of something like equanimity. So being able to be completely open to whatever's happening, good and bad, pain or pleasure, giving them a deep taste of that so that they can know that that's a possibility. And then the hope is that motivates them to start meditating or start doing the mantras or yoga practice, start trying to get more of that.
So you're helping hack them to show them what might happen if they began to meditate in a way,
That's the first step. And that's already occurring in our lab. Some of our 20-year-olds who've never meditated, living through a pandemic, they got a lot of stuff going on in their minds. And one of the interventions gives them just a little space between their thoughts. And
Wow.
they start realizing, oh, wait, I don't have to keep thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking. You know, they get a little bit of like, I can just let my thought go. That's a big insight for a lot of 20-year-olds.
That's huge. And I mean, in the case where, you hear about monks having to meditate for 10,000 hours to get to those states, you're able to do this quite quickly, right?
It seems like, the very beginning states very quickly. We're not claiming we're giving you 10,000 hours of experience, but you get to taste, a little taste of some alter in your perception in a way that's very useful for people. But the other side of that is that what we're doing to the brain actually helps the brain learn faster. So it's not only that we're trying to get you to the state, but we're actually trying to open up what we call neuroplasticity, just the brain's ability to learn and change. And I think that's what, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, mantras, all of these things are shaking up our patterns and allowing the brain to be more open to changing, to have new patterns and hopefully more healthy patterns instead of, the disruptive type of patterns we can get into. So that's the other side of our work, is we're kind of opening up the door of perception, if you want to call it that. And then we're helping you learn a little faster if you keep practicing while that door is open. And that's the real trick. We want you to walk through the door and keep practicing.
Go through.
Yeah.
And I think that you said it in one of your talks, that the Dalai Lama said that he wished he had your machine so that he could get to mindful states very quickly. Is that correct? What did he say to you?
That is true. And that meeting with the Dalai Lama changed my life, like many people. So I was at a science conference and he was invited to give the big talk, the big plenary talk. It was very controversial. The scientists didn't want him there. Some scientists didn't want him there. They said, we don't want a religious leader talking to our science conference. And he gave this beautiful speech about the relationship of ethics and science, and how brain scientists, particularly, once we figure out the brain, we're going to have more power than the nuclear bomb by magnitudes, because we'll have power over your world, your inner world. And I was like 20 at the time, and it really changed my life to hear that. But at the very end of the talk, he said, and once you figure out the mind, if you can give me meditation experience without having to meditate, I will do it. I will sign up. And he laughed, and there were 10,000 people in this auditorium, and they all laughed. And we were like, oh my God, did he just say that?
And thus came about SEMA.
And so that was 2005. It's taken me this long to get my life together. And
wow.
Really, that experience with the Dalai Lama got me interested in meditation. I wasn't a meditator at the time. And
wonderful.
I was kind of like, what is this stuff?
You're getting close to a gadget almost, right? You're getting close to a clinical tool that can be used. I love it. But what's fascinating is that you see a lot of breakthroughs happening at the moment in psychedelics, in other forms of brain mapping. We had the earlier things of mindfulness mapping and fMRIs and all that, but you're cutting into a new area now, which is inducing states using ultrasound and infrasound and other sound and technologies, right? But is this, in terms of clinical and therapeutic benefits, do you see this matching what you're seeing in psilocybin or MDMA or acid and things like that, or DMT? Or is this something completely different in your experience?
Right now, I think it's somewhere in between. So it's a really good question, because we had the decade of the brain where we had all these MRI brain maps. We spent billions of dollars. And the problem is anxiety, depression, and loneliness, and honestly, suicide are all increasing. So the hope was we would get this map of the brain with these beautiful brain images. We somehow start helping people, and it didn't happen. And the problem is because we need interventions that change the brain. And mindfulness and meditation, they change the brain. You're doing something to literally change the neurons. And so that's also what psychedelics does. You literally put a chemical in your brain, you change the perceptual gain, is one way to think about it, and everything changes. So we're doing that in my lab with brain stimulation. It's just that it's more focused. So we can go in and change just one part of the brain, And that part we think deals with, let's say, sense of self. So we can loosen up the self graspiness just a little bit. Whereas I think psychedelics just blast it open and you get to see, you know, what's behind the curtain for a minute or two. Whereas we can be more precise with that. We can just change that system a little, let the self loosen up, and then let you practice while the self is looser. So exactly,
it's kind of a long-term rewiring in neuroplasticity terms. It's kind of, it ripples something into you and you start rewiring. And while a psychedelic experience gives you a movie instantly, and then you're either healed or you go back to trends and patterns of past neural kind of activity. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think exactly right. I kind of see a continuum of practice, meditation and mantra. Then psychedelics they can bring you very quickly to what happens. Mindfulness and mantra takes a long time, sometimes not, depending on the practice. But to get the brain and the nervous system to change so that you're a changed being, that takes a lot of work because your nervous system has been learning, for me, 38 years. Yeah. Right, I've been learning and
57.
No, you're not 57. I don't believe it.
I lost all my hair. No.
I thought you just did that so we'd believe you more.
I think it's a silly smile that does it, really. But one of the questions that, you know that I teach and practice advanced stages of yoga, which is the use of mantra and breathing techniques to really hack ourselves beyond mindfulness in a way. So, yeah. We in our work too, we bring everybody to samyama, that equanimity, and you kind of relax and deep tranquility. You start emitting gamma waves and you're happy and you're kind of dissolving the two sides of the brain. But there's been, in this advanced Kundalini work and Kriya work, a lot of use of scientific terminology over 30, 40 years, which it was always suspicious for me because it was always kind of like, well, you're not scientists. What are you talking about? You're like, why are you doing this? And there seems to be a correlationship, and this is something that I'm intrigued by. And maybe you can talk to it from your experience in visual studies as well, is that one of the first experiences that happens in certain deep breathing advanced techniques is visionary states. The brain opens up, you almost like a third eye opens, you're seeing states of geometries, maybe lights, you're going into colors, then you start seeing sacred round geometries and triangles, and the deeper you get into it, the more psychedelic it begins to happen for you, and you're able to go into it. And I do teach that, but I've never understood fully that what's happening there. Are we affecting the occipital lobe? Are we, what are we doing? What do you feel and think it might be? What do you think?
It's a great question, and if we actually could answer this, we'd get the Nobel Prize. So if we
I'm coming to you.
If we get the right answer right now, we'll get the Nobel Prize. But it really depends on what we're actually looking at. So right now, I'm looking at the screen. It's emitting photons, and photons are hitting my retina, and the brain is wrapping context and meaning and concepts. All that stuff is getting wrapped around the photons coming into my brain. And I have an experience, and somehow that's consciousness. We have no idea how that works. But my guess is when you start stripping away the brain's feedback and the contextualizing and the concepts, you strip all that away and you get closer and closer to the sensory input. You're getting closer to reality, right? You're getting further from your own mind and getting closer to what's actually going on. And I think in a sense, you might actually be seeing some of the code that your brain is using or that nature is using. You can say whatever you want.
Underlying code.
The code, we'll think about it as code because we like computers. It's not really code. It's something else. It's a pattern in nature. And the brain is going to constantly try to make meaning out of things, even if you strip away everything. And so I think it sort of depends on which layer you're looking at in your own processing framework.
But kind of peeling away the layers, and each layer has a visual metaphor it's giving us. Is that the case?
And I do think it's a pattern, and I think it's geometric in some nature. I think the brain is using geometry to process. I'm not talking about sacred geometry, although it could be sacred geometry, but I'm just talking about the math that the brain is using. And I think the more that you strip away the virtual reality layers that our mind is creating right now to help us survive in the world, the more you're getting to that fundamental math and geometry that's in the system. And I think you could go deeper and say, in some sense, it's all vibrating geometry around us. And whether you're seeing that or not, I don't know. We have no way to know that. But I do think you do see these geometry patterns showing up on psychedelics, on mystical experience, when mothers are giving birth. You know, when you force the human brain to get into the senses, you get the geometry popping out. And you know, my neuroscience friends would say that's just the pattern of the firing of the neurons. My mystical
in the occipital lobe upwards, is that what happens?
Exactly. You're literally seeing the matrix pattern, you know, back there in the visual system. That's one hypothesis in science. My mystical friends will say you're seeing the geometry of the spheres.
Yeah. The beautiful
music might not be
exactly.
Might not be separate.
Plato would be very happy. Plato would be very happy. But one thing that comes to mind is that the more you do this work, the more it's kind of like a progression. You're peeling away in a progressive way, right? So you end up with these ecstatic states which seem to be you can't control, and then you start to enter into a kind of matrix kind of portal. Then you are entering into a deeper and deeper, and it's ironic because the end state seems to be what the Buddhists would call Shunyata, absolute void, right? Which is a kind of bliss state of nothingness, right? Yeah. That comes. Now, if that's the underlying architecture from which this code is being generated, does that imply that the entire universe is a series of these codes that we are then able to interpret step by step by step? Is that the case, that geometries and create these realities that we seem to perceive? Is that what you think might be happening?
If I understand the question, I think that's one direction that you could go in. So one of my favorite physicists is David Bohm,
yes,
which a lot of people in your audience probably know as well. But David Bohm was a very serious quantum physicist. And he saw that the whole world is made out of this one thing that's folding and unfolding into other things. And that's a plausible physical hypothesis about reality. And that matches a lot of the subjective reports of the mystics and the deep contemplative people. Right. And so I think that, you know, to me as a scientist, it's very interesting that you do long-term practice, you do mantras, you do psychedelics, you have a baby, orgasm, and maybe epilepsy, right? These things all tend to bring you to a very similar, you know, positive valence, oneness, communion, you know, divine, whatever you want to call it. They tend to bring you in that direction. Now, why is that? Across cultures, across genders, across peoples, across histories, it brings you there. I think that that's very salient and interesting from a scientific point of view, because it could be that half the people experience hell and whatever, and the other half experiences unification and oneness. But actually, it's most people go towards the void. And I think that's telling us something
non-dual, non-local, non-dual state in a way.
Right.
Yes,
there's something unifying there, and I think science just isn't ready to go there yet. But I do think we're actually headed there with our, you know, neuroscience to physics, biology to physics connection.
It's kind of like what Spinoza described as the mind of the universe in a way. Yeah. You know, it's this consciousness behind consciousness.
Yeah.
And but tell me something. Why were the ancients, and what is the correlation to modern neuroscience of this obsession with the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland? You know, because when we vibrate with mantras, for example, we're affecting, you know, the pituitary area and the midbrain area here. When we are, and this, the ancients right back have always been obsessed with the pineal gland. Do you see a correlationship in that with the third eye idea and these principles?
It's a good question. I was just talking to someone about the pineal gland the other day. someone named Rick Straussman, who
Yes.
discovered DMT.
We know
as a
him well in
therapeutic.
this family. We know him well.
Okay, Rick, I just got to meet him. Beautiful person.
No, we know of him. We know his work because he's a big prophet of this work. So it's a good thing.
Yeah. So we have the possibility of modulating the pineal gland with brain stimulation. Now, whether we should do it or not, I need a good scientific reason. And so before I do it, I want to have a good hypothesis. And I've been looking into it. And, the pineal gland has a long history. It goes back to Rene Descartes, the philosopher. And I think for a long time, there's this intuition that there's this unified place where all the sensory data and memory and perception is being unified, because I experience a unified perception. I don't experience sound and sight as being separated. They're all kind of together. And we had this idea about the soul for a long time. That was this one thing. And now I think as a society, we're sort of letting go of that concept. And now we're looking for the mind and consciousness. I think we're actually starting to let go of that concept as well, because there's no one place where all of this seems to be unified.
It's a distributed sensory experience.
And what does that mean for the sense of self, right? If it's distributed, maybe there isn't one place where the sense of self is. Maybe there's not a sense of self. That's kind of where we go with this.
But that's the Buddhist idea, that there is no self. There is, and that it's a collective kind of experience that we're going through.
And it's somehow there's this process of illusion that makes it feel like it's all together. But in reality, this is all happening separately in your brain. So if you hear a car go by, the hearing and the sight are being processed in different parts of your brain, and we don't really know where they're being put back together. But it seems like it is. I hear and I see it. It just goes by. It's the same thing, right? So, the pineal gland was this kind of hope of a place for maybe where things are coming together.
What was the biological purpose of the pineal gland apart from sort of balancing melatonin? I mean, what else was its purpose in early creatures, in reptilian animals, or, the reptilian stage? And what do you think it was? What was the neuroscience of it? What was the purpose of the pineal gland in a way?
It's a great question, mostly about regulating sleep. So you got the sleep-wake cycle. It's very important for biological systems to have rhythms. And so the pineal gland's really processing that. They thought maybe it had some endogenous DMT in it as well.
That was a big question, yes.
Maybe not that much. There's more DMT in your visual cortex. That's what Rick Straussman told me.
Right.
Back here. So this gets back to that whole...
That's what I always felt, because, in the tantric yoga culture, they call this area of the brain the hamsa. It means the swan that spreads its wings. Right. So when the Kundalini comes to this point at the neck, it spreads out, and that's when you get these visionary states. And that seems to be when DMT is released, right, into the brain.
Yep.
So, and the first color for some reason that everyone experiences is blue, right? And is there a relationship with the brain's ability to process that in blue for some reason in your studies?
Great question. I've wondered that, because I've read about both blue, purple, and white light.
Yes. At the stages, in a way,
Yeah, I have no idea. I wish I could guess, but it happens. People report it, and there's probably some basic feature there of the visual system that's emerging, but who knows?
Okay, let's go a little deeper beyond the visionary state, right? Now, one of the descriptions of entering the void, or that singularity, or the non-dual state, is that an immense feeling of bliss comes into the practitioner. This immense kind of, what maybe a vagus nerve implication, maybe other things that make the heart erupt in joy and bliss and love, and you cannot, it's irresistible. It's almost like, and I've experienced it myself, so I know. That's why I have this stupid, silly, happy look on my face all the time. And then it kind of becomes a continuous feed that seems to be trickling through the whole system, right? Now, so is there a correlationship between why do I have visionary and acoustic states first, and then the bliss states? What's your feeling on that? Why do I go through that cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, there's a deep principle that may be emerging around the idea of symmetry. So it seems the more symmetrical, if you look at like EEG, right, the brain oscillations, you have a bunch of electrodes, you're looking at the brain. The more mystical states, the more bliss states, the more higher the jhanas, the more symmetry and there's not a lot of science. So I'll say this is very, very new and early.
I'm excited by it. I'm excited by the potential.
It's so cool. So it looks like you see symmetry, and symmetry may be related to the valence or how good it feels. The more symmetry, the more valence. The less symmetry, the less valence. Mm-hmm. So depression, for example, is an asymmetry in the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
And my PhD advisor, John Allen, is famous for studying this. So this idea of symmetry is really interesting. And if you take a psychedelic, you tend to get massive, crazy amounts of this just local symmetry everywhere. So I think that means what's happening in the brain is the pieces that are separating you, the things that are creating that separateness and the thoughts and the worry and the pandemic and oh my God, and that takes a lot of processing. It takes a lot of energy to do that in your brain. And if I had an EEG, what I'd see is there's all this asymmetrical stuff. The amygdala is not talking to the visuals, and it's just like amygdala just gets to eat all the food in your brain and make you really worry. And the amygdala maybe likes that because it's a living being and it wants to eat the food as well, right? So what happens is when you do these practices, you start seeing the symmetry. Everybody starts going in sync. And as that happens, you just have this blast of bliss coming out of the system. Now, why that happens, I don't know, but I think it's because you're just less separated and more just in sync, with everything that's happening. And that tends to then just amplify the positive states because it takes so much effort to make the negative states happen.
I mean, the entire purpose of all the Eastern meditation practices has always been Ananda, this bliss state, and that's what the holy grail of what we're looking for. We're not looking for the vision of the archangels and the devis and the devas, and neither are we looking for the sound of the universe coming into our heads, but we are seeking that bliss state of what's called samadhi, of this complete tranquility that occurs, right? And I think that what I find fascinating is that samadhi, or these experiences, can also be experienced by adding mantras to a practice, right? This is this is the deep work I do, is mantra work. Mm-hmm. And we are and I hope that we're going to do a bunch of research with you soon on this. That'll be exciting, one day soon. And the whole work of sound, and especially when we take two languages of Sanskrit and Hebrew, right? We find the use of 22 letter sounds in Hebrew and 36 consonant sounds and 14 vowel sounds in Sanskrit that seem to trigger neurobiological activity that induces those states of tranquility, sexuality, abundance, calm, intention. Have you seen any studies, or have you in your work seen the relationship between sound and making sounds and the brain and what happens? Have you started to see that?
Yeah, there's a small but growing number of studies looking at sound healing and things like that. So, always in science, it's in the context of clinical. We have to make it clinical and pathological. But I was actually on a dissertation committee where they were looking at this at Sophia University, somebody called Karimbar. And he was looking at mantras over audio. So there's one way you can hear the mantras, you can vocalize the mantras, you can do both. And basically, the finding is that doing mantras or listening to mantras tends to activate the vagus nerve, which calms you down. And that calming effect has like a low frequency reverberation over the whole body. And it really sets the tone for the whole system to calm down, less inflammation, and be receptive, so it kind of puts you in that type of state. But on top of that, the mantras, when you speak them, they actually break up that mental pattern that we were talking about. And that is really interesting because, as you were asking earlier, you go from the perception and it kind of ripples up to the kind of higher levels or whatever in the brain. And I think that's very interesting because, obviously the auditory system is level 1 in the brain, and then you got level 2, level 3, level 4, you get to the prefrontal, and this is where all the crap and worry is happening. And so I do think that these mantras are like a reverberation through the system, and they allow the system to kind of have that reverberation massage, so that by the time the little thought about, oh my God, everything's collapsing or whatever, it's like, all right, the mantra breaks that up and you're able to just be present with yourself and not continue that thought train. So I think that reverberation principle is very fundamental in that.
It boggles the mind what made our shamanic ancestors experiment with this stuff. It's like, I mean, they must have been sitting there in the mountains and jungles just vibrating with nature and trying to figure it out. And
yeah.
Do you think that there was a causality between psychedelics and those intuitive listening and understanding states? Where do you feel that psychedelics may have interfered with the expansion of human consciousness early on? Is that a case to be put forward, like Terence McKenna says?
I think, yeah, the Terence McKenna hypothesis is intuitive to me. I think that makes sense. I mean, it's hard to verify that, so we don't know. But I can definitely, so Terence McKenna says that our early ancestors found magic mushrooms and that helped consciousness evolve faster. Makes sense to me. I could see many other ways that consciousness could have evolved, including, the human population got down to about 10,000 to maybe less at one point, when we were walking across the land bridge. That would also
Ice Age. During the Ice Age.
During the Ice Age. So that would also make consciousness evolve quickly because we have to survive.
Right.
But
trauma can bring about expansion. Trauma can bring about expansion.
Trauma does too.
Especially collective trauma. A collective trauma brings about a collective expansion. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I could imagine it was all of the above. And we're the type of creatures where we just use everything to evolve.
But in a way, that also gives us hope for the expansion into technology and AI and where we're going, is that now we're creating our own collective consciousness in a way, and with technology. And, I'm already seeing experiments going on of 3 people relaying instructions by magnetic, their sounds and vibrations, going on in science. And so we're creating psychic beings in a way using technology. And that's quite fascinating. So I am very hopeful about the new technology. Do you feel that that's a good positive thing and that's coming, this idea of expanded neurons going out into a collective state with technology? Or do you see it as a danger to reduce our ability to use our brains in a way?
I see, it's a great question, and I see both.
Okay.
And I think it's all happening at the same time. The tech is going to be crucial, I think, for helping us get through what one of my colleagues has called the precipice. Humanity is walking on the precipice right now. And with climate change and everything else that's going on, it's not that we're going to necessarily go extinct, but we need to realize the situation that we're in. We're walking on the precipice of a mountain and we can fall off. And I think technology is going to be crucial to get us through, but we need a lot of other things besides tech to get us through that precipice. And one of those things is that the tech is able, sort of like the pandemic, it can make all of the structures that are bad, so the economic situation, it can make those grow faster. And so my real worry for the tech is that while, yeah, it'll be really great for connecting us, if we don't use it intentionally in the right way, it's just going to make the rich richer and the poor poorer, and it can have that consequence as well. And so a lot of my work is trying to steer it towards the ethical framework of saying, we got to be really careful not to just make, the big mega companies bigger because now they have access to your mind or whatever. Like, we got to make sure it's in the context of essentially spiritual healing, is I think the direction we need to push it into.
I agree with you, and it worries me to see how much venture capital is moving into psychedelic research. That really worries me, because that means it's going to be product oriented, it's going to be clinical product oriented, it's going to be pharmaceutical oriented, and it's not going to be spiritual and mystical as we've always treated it. And that's the risk we face, is that it becomes a utility and quickly get somewhere and fix something. You're not depressed anymore. Look, magic, And I think to that point is a very beautiful point to round off on, is that as we approach this threshold, this precipice, this kind of, in the ancient tantra they used to call this bhaira, the most fearsome, worrying, frightening edge of death experience that you're going to face as a collective or whatever, and then once you break through, suddenly you're in tranquility. It's a very strange phenomena that the biggest fear may lead to the biggest progress as evolutionary beings. And I think, would you agree, this has happened over and over again for humanity, right?
Yep, definitely. And I think there's actually, in the mythology of some of the religions, destruction is part of the birth, rebirth process. And I think that's happened to humanity many times, that we've gone through these squeezes and then we always come out bigger. And, suffering tends to be reduced on a massive scale, but then we kind of squeeze through again. And I think it takes intention and awareness, about what's happening. It's like if you're pregnant and, you're aware that you're pregnant and you're aware you're going to have a baby, and then you're aware of it's going to be short-term pain and a long-term, a lot of, beautiful connection with that child. And I think we're right there. We're like, oh my God, we're pregnant. And the pregnancy is the spiritual baby, but we can't call it that because we're in a scientific world. We can't use the word spiritual. We have to use another word. It's like,
we're in a materialist paradigm. Let's fix this, and
it's falling apart, but so we're right there. We're trying to find the ways to even describe this process. And I think tech and science and everything is a big part of that, but we're going to come out the other side with a new language and a new world. I'm very excited by that.
It's ironic that you're a philosopher as well, so it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be. That's one of the recent films I saw was Don't Look Up, and it's just wonderful, hysterical, human. Ending. I would have ended it differently, but it was brilliant. It was just a brilliant, case for what short attention spans give this world today, and short-term gain versus, oh my God, what's coming to us, and
and that movie was beautiful. Almost made me cry as a scientist, because it
made my gut hurt. It made my gut hurt, because I was laughing and crying at the same time, like wonderful.
Exactly. It's like, as a scientist, this is what it feels like. We've been trying to tell everyone, like, this is happening, and it's okay.
Wake up, and then you might as well just have a dinner and wait for the end of the world, and that's a good thing to do while the politicos all fly off into space. Wonderful.
Totally. And as a practitioner, it's like, but that's okay, and that's like the different hats that I wear.
Yes.
This is happening, but as long as we, work together and transition, it's going to be beautiful. But we got to get to that point.
But then, then the humanist argument comes in that says, well, got to do something, got to give everybody the red pill. We gotta make waking up a natural thing, and not sit in a stoic way and say, well, this is going to happen, and have dinner.
Exactly.
It's got to be a little. I think we have to be a little bit more activist than that. But you're right. You're absolutely right. And,
I agree, 100%. It is.
You got to find a middle ground between the progressive scientific madness and the just sit still and know that this is what it is. And then in the middle, you got to act somewhere,
Exactly. That's why I love the analogy of the precipice, is that most people don't even realize they're walking on the side of a mountain. And you're in nature and it's beautiful, but you got to be careful. You're on the side of a mountain. And we're all like, wake up, we're on the side of a mountain. But look at the top of the mountain. It's beautiful up there. Like, we got to get there. So, that's the job right now. It's like, just,
10,000, a few thousand years from now, another 100,000 people will cross over some Bering Strait somewhere and go to America or somewhere. And we'll continue our evolution into the next stage. And by that time, all our technologies will be gone. And that's a good thing too. We don't know where it's going, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was wonderful speaking with you for this past nearly 45 minutes. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with me. And I look forward to our joint experiments in the very near future. And let's make sound be the red pill for everybody to wake up to. I think that would be a good one.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. Always love
it was wonderful. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with my community. And blessings, brother. May your work wake up millions of people. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, brother. Take care.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks.
Thank you.